KCRW sponsors include A24, presenting Moonlight, a film chronicling 3 chapters in the life of a young black man discovering his identity and experiencing first love as he moves from childhood into manhood. In theaters now.
From KCRW Santa Monica and KCRW.com, it's The Treatment. I'm Elvis Mitchell. You see the new show, fresh off the boat. You hear the 90s hip-hop and the references to Stephen King. No, it's not a free weekend on Showtime. It's a brand new comedy adaptation of Eddie Huang's memoir. The person behind the show and behind one of my favorite shows, Don't Trust the Bee in Apartment 23, and the person who gave, I think, a really lively touch to her years on American Dad, Nahnatchka, sitting across me. Nahnatchka, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure.
We should say the show is set in Orlando, and it's about, it really holds in a lot of ways very close to Eddie's book about a kid from a Taiwanese family who wants desperately to prove he's hard in hip-hop terms. He's a little short and young to be that.
He's 11. He's still sleeping with a glowworm in the show.
That's okay. So it's ODB, so it's fine. It works out well for everybody. But that idea of being an outsider, too, and finding really hip-hop was outsider culture.
Exactly.
So that's the reason that Eddie in the book connects to it, because it really is very much about sort of staking a claim, finding territory.
Exactly. Feeling like you don't belong, and then taking that otherness and making it an anthem, making it sort of turning it into a powerful thing. And because you don't belong, you find a place where you do, where other sort of like-minded people. And I really related to that, reading his memoir. I mean, I thought it was a key component to his story and something that we definitely wanted to, continue in the series.
But I would even go back to Be in Apartment 23, because it also is kind of about an outsider trying to fit into another culture. You're sort of like second protagonist following Chloe around, basically doesn't know if she likes her or not, but there's something fascinating about that. You like, for you, the idea of these outsized characters who sort of like stir up trouble is something you're attracted to as a writer, isn't it?
Definitely. And, probably as a person as well.
Okay.
But as a writer, certainly, because it's like, that's really interesting to me, where like in, Apartment 23, June couldn't tell if Chloe was her best friend or... And
June is a roommate who sort of comes in and basically she's being sort of scammed every week.
Like a Craigslist scam, and she's just going to take her money and make her move out by being the worst roommate in the world. And then June sticks around, and that's the series. And she was like, is this my best friend, or is this like a criminal who's, trying to steal all my money? And sort of walking that line of not knowing, I think, is really interesting. But
the idea of these people sort of appropriating like cultural glamour. For Chloe, she's sort of dressed like this femme fatale, and for your young lead here, he basically, he's got, I've forgotten what oversized, sweatpants look like. And seeing an 11-year-old Asian kid in a Kangol is probably one of my favorite images in the history of television. Was that a tough one to get past people? Did they go along with the network pretty much with that?
They did, I mean, it's really important also, though, because the family is not wealthy. So it's like young Eddie in the show aspires to a certain look, but doesn't quite pull it off, number one, because he's a little kid. And, if you look at old pictures of yourself as a kid, you're like, God, I was really going for something, and I did not make it. Like I know what I was trying to do, but I didn't get there. And so we really wanted to keep that part of it. Like he wants to look like his heroes, and he just can't really pull it off, because he's a little kid, and also they don't have the money, and also, he can't. He doesn't really have the swagger yet, but he's getting there.
But I guess I wanted to ask you too, because these, and Eddie's a bigger than life character, as was Chloe. What is it in writing these things? Are they kind of like alter egos for you? These figures who just sort of got these big swaths and in a lot of ways don't care what other people think, but in some crucial ways care very much what other people think?
Yeah, it's interesting. I really am drawn to writing sort of like unapologetic characters in whatever.
Then you can say that was Roger on American Dad in some ways.
Oh my God, Roger's the epitome. I mean, yeah, just characters who, even if they behave badly, are still good people. And I think that's really interesting to me, because it's like you don't have to be a bad person to do a bad thing, and you don't have to be a good person and always do good things. Like that, I like the sort of dichotomy of good people sometimes behaving badly and not apologizing, because you don't have to walk around life apologizing. And to me, comedy is boring if you apologize for it. It feels very safe. And, I like to sort of have people act in certain ways and see if I can, bring it back and, put some heart into it and make you understand at least, why people are behaving the way they are, even if they don't apologize.
But I guess, too, because these people are so, again, it seems almost in some ways that Roger is kind of like the sort of the lever that sort of got you going on this, because we should say that character on American Dad is an alien who not only every episode, but several times an episode takes on different guises. I think incredibly fun. I mean, he's sort of like the alien version of Chloe in that way. I mean, an opportunist who really, in a weird way, doesn't have a mean bone in his body, just wants just a pleasure seeker.
Right. He's pure id. Like, he just wants what he wants, and he'll go to any length to get it, and then once he gets it, he probably doesn't even want it anymore. It's the chase and the journey.
But also weirdly wants to help sometimes.
Yeah, and you don't know why. It's like sometimes there's something that will strike him as like, this is my cause, this is my moment.
But the idea of these characters, in the case of Eddie on Fresh Off the Boat, you have a literal child, but certainly with Roger and with Chloe, they weren't. But they acted like kids anyway. And there's something that appeals to you about that kind of thing, too, isn't it? Somebody who's too old to be acting that way but acts that way anyway?
For sure. I mean, because I think so much of growing up, you sort of suppress those urges, when you're a kid, that you just want something.
Did you suppress those urges as a kid? I mean, were you a pretty sort of responsible, hardworking kid?
I mean, as you grow up, it's like you have to go into work every day, and you can't sort of just do everything that you want to do, and you can't, your parents make you work. You start to sort of grow up quickly, and I think that, before you sort of have all those expectations put on you, you're really just, you're kind of going after what you want all the time. You don't have any filter being like, oh, I want this, but I shouldn't have it, or I feel bad for wanting it, or something like that. And I think having adult characters behave that way, or aliens in Roger's case, is really funny to me, where they don't have those filters that we put on as adults and being like, oh, I got to go to work, or I got to pay rent, or, she just does what she wants. And, young Eddie too, but he's a literal child. So I think. But
his mom is somebody who also, and again, going at those people who seem to be one way or another don't have those filters, is somebody who doesn't have that filter.
I mean, I love writing strong women characters. I really do. And, you could also point back to Roger as the beginning of that, even though he's an alien. We don't know
what sex he is.
We don't know what sex he is.
We just know he likes to have sex.
Exactly.
All the time.
I mean, he has many orifices or none, depending on what story we're telling. And he has a man's name, but who knows who gave him that name. So... But yeah, I mean, I really, really like those sort of strong characters. And Constance Wu, who plays Jessica on the show, is just such like Kristen Ritter. They have such amazing comic timing that they just elevate. You're like, oh, this line works, or this line's kind of funny, and then you hear them deliver it, and it's just like, whoa, that's better than I even thought it was going to be.
It's the treatment we're talking about in the new show, Fresh Off the Boat, with creator Nahnatchka. I think what I like about your writing so much, though, is that you like the idea of using voice. I mean, you write characters who very quickly have very specific voices, and I wonder how you work that out as a writer.
I don't know. I just start with what I would want to see and sort of what I would want to hear myself, and things that I haven't necessarily seen before. Because for me, it's like I just don't want to be boring. I don't want to be stale. So I'm always sort of striving for what's interesting about this character, what's fresh about this character. And on the two shows that I've done now, coming off American Dad, like those were at the forefront of my mind. And like, on Fresh Off the Boat, young Eddie is the most realized character coming out of the memoir, because it was written by Eddie and from his point of view, and fleshing out the other characters around him, making this a family comedy was really exciting, because then I get to focus on like the Jessica character and the Lewis character played by Randall Park, and what makes them funny, what makes them real, and taking a lot of inspiration from like my parents, other people's parents, and also what makes them, have conflict amongst each other, because you don't want people sort of agreeing with each other all the time. That's not funny either. So I don't know. I guess I kind of just approach it from what's the most interesting, not boring version of these kind of characters.
Well, I think you're simplifying a little bit, because it seems like one of the things you like to do is to create comic tension and characters with very different goals. And that's definitely the case. I mean, there's often kind of an innocent at some point in what you do. And that innocent contrasts with the person who's kind of worldly. So the wants being so different, is something that you tend to gravitate towards too, it seems. I mean, in a way that's different from Eddie's book even.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, it's most interesting when those two things are in the same person, where you have the innocence, but also the worldliness in the same character, where it's like, where Chloe kind of is like a baby in the world. It's like she doesn't really know how things work. She probably couldn't mail a letter if you asked her to. Yet she's very worldly in other ways, certainly in the party life and just different angles that she works and scamming people. And I think Jessica, it's the same for her character too, and Fresh Off the Boat in the show. It's like she's very knowledgeable and she's a mother and she's, comes from a place of love, but, unapologetic, but also she doesn't really know how things are working around her. She's trying to sort of feel her way through like this new neighborhood that she's in and these new neighbors that are rollerblading, and she doesn't understand like what the appeal is of this. But she's going to try. Or NASCAR, has to be explained to her.
But there's almost that thing, too, in some of these characters that you tend to be attracted to. They have a kind of blindness, a blind spot.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely.
And what is it that attracts you to that makes you think that that's a great... Because I think I feel between these two shows, that's something I can see. Mm-hmm. Between Jessica the mom and going back to Chloe in Apartment 23, there's a part of them that can't really see the havoc they wreak. Which actually makes them, which speaks to that decency you're talking about, because they're not bad people. They just don't see the damage they do.
Right. They just go through life very, with blinders on and sort of focus, and they don't see what's happening around them. Chloe had a line in Apartment 23 where she's like, I'm like a shark. I just got to keep on moving or else I die. And that I love about those characters. I think those are really interesting qualities because blind spots to me are one of the funniest. I think, everybody has at least one. And really intelligent, funny, smart people, if you can find the blind spot for them, like the one thing that they don't know about themselves, that's a very interesting comedic entry point for me. And there's an episode coming up of Fresh Off the Boat, literally called The Blind Spot, where where we reveal what Jessica's is and we reveal what Lewis's is. And they can see each other's, but they can't see their own. And those are, some of my favorite stories to tell.
I like that idea of somebody who's just moving ahead. Again, for me, in these things you do, that idea of comic tension is just a way to sort of just throw off sparks all the time, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the comedy tension to me is what makes a scene alive or what makes a story feel like it's cracking. It's like you can feel it. Like when it starts to lag, that's where you start to, as a writer or me, start to look at it like, why is this feeling? What am I missing here? What's wrong here? What do I have to go back and fix maybe in a prior scene to make this scene work? Like, what is the problem? Because there isn't, the tension is gone,
And when you delineate the characters that fast, does it really help you to do that? Because again, there are kind of bold strokes here in these early episodes of these shows that you've done where we sort of know who people are right away. Yeah,
I mean, I think it really does. If it's like I like to come out of the gate right away because I don't know what we're waiting for. It's like let's just get to it. Like, who are these people? What is interesting about them? And what do I find funny about them? And comedy is so subjective. It's like no one's right or wrong for finding something funny or not funny. It's just your matter of taste, really. So it's like, for me, I like coming out strong. I like strong characters who don't apologize. And I like going to quick flashback. I like just using all different kinds of devices to get inside a person's head, make us understand, like that flashback to her and her friends. That would have been easy to just sort of talk about, like, oh, I miss my friends, and maybe do a verbal joke. But to me, it's much funnier to flash back and see it and come back to present, so I don't mind doing, like, a lot of that sort of, having fun with that.
We're going to flash back for a second. My guest is Nahnatchka. She's creator and exec producer of the show, Fresh Off the Boat on ABC. It's The Treatment. There's more to come. Stay with us.
KCRW's popular iPad Music Mine app is now available for the iPhone. From quick discovery to deep exploration, take KCRW Music with you wherever you go. Download at kcrw.com/musicmine.
Welcome back. It's The Treatment. I'm Elvis Mitchell. My guest is Nahnatchka Khan. I got her name right. I'm very specific about that. I like seeing that name.
Thank you.
I just like seeing that name on television.
It's good to have as an adult, but as a kid, it was rough.
I wouldn't know. My name is Elvis. She's the executive producer and creator of the new series on ABC, Fresh Off the Boat. And because there is so much, I guess, sort of electricity in these shows that you do, when you're dealing with animated characters, cartoon characters, let's just call it that, they're two-dimensional.
Right.
I mean, there's a part of them that doesn't really register. So there is a kind of meanness that Roger can have, or that even Stan, who also, I mean, in fact, that entire household, with the exception of the youngest boy on American Dad, is full of people with blind spots. Nobody sees what else they're doing except for him. And he's the one person who's way too sensitive for his own good. And translating that to live action stuff, because you worked on American Dad for a long time, what was there a kind of adjustment period for you in doing that?
Not really. You know, I wrote the pilot of Apartment 23 when I was on staff at American Dad.
Okay.
And so, I mean, I'd written live action characters before I got on American Dad. And then what I really learned from my time there, though, is the sort of the interesting storytelling that you have to do in animation. It has to move at a much quicker pace. Because for whatever reason, you know, you can't have scenes that lag when you're doing animation. It just feels...
You can't do reaction shots.
Yeah, you can't do reaction shots. You can't, like, play, like, the sort of, the storytelling is much more accelerated.
And then what happens, I would guess, is, not what I guess, just from what I saw in the show, is use the jokes as a way to advance the storytelling in a way they don't generally do on live-action sitcoms.
Right. And, you know, that the fact that we were all there to make a comedy, that was really important to everybody running that show. You know, starting from Seth MacFarlane to Mike Barker and Matt Weitzman, who co-created it with him, like, we are here to make people laugh, and we want to tell interesting stories with interesting characters, but at the end of the day, we want people to laugh out loud. Like, we don't want them to smile, you know, and that's where it sort of became known as, like, you know, different smile shows, where it's like, you know...
The must-see comedy block.
Yeah, you're smiling, you know, you're not offended.
Oh, yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, it's good. But, you know, so I think... that plus the accelerated storytelling is really what I wanted to try in a different setting with different characters. And for whatever reason, you know, I really wanted to do a show featuring a modern-day Holly Golightly, which is where...
And the real version of Holly Golightly, too,
Yeah.
not the sort of the sweet version from Breakfast at Tiffany, but the one from the movie, but the one from the book, who really is a sociopath.
Exactly. That's exactly right. It's exactly right. And I wanted to sort of set that character in the present day. And I thought it would be interesting, you know, to have the audience have the sort of eyes in, you know, creating a roommate character for her, who's just like a regular girl who's trying to get a job and pay bills and watch Dancing with the Stars. And this other woman on the fringes of society is sort of floating in on like a cot of champagne. And she's like, how do you pay rent? Like, do you have a job? Like, how do you exist? So, you know, it was sort of a natural evolution coming out of that world and trying to create.
And it's interesting, too, because in having a family sitcom, especially with kids, you know, part of the luxury of having a show with adult characters, and at one point or another, you know, June can leave. Eddie's not going anywhere.
No.
At least not for the 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, exactly. He is locked in there. Also, I've never worked with kid actors before, and have you ever heard of the term pumpkin?
No.
So on the call sheet, next to the actor's name, there's a thing that says pumpkins at 5:30 or pumpkins at 6. And that's like these child actor laws, I guess. So they have like hard outs. So Hudson Yang, who plays Eddie, he's gone at 5:30. So if you're not done with a scene and you're rewriting or you're still trying to fit, like, too bad. You know, it's not like adults where you can like keep shooting. It's like, okay, you know, we're going overtime, but it's okay. Let's just get the best. It's like, well, can we get a body double and shoot over his shoulder? I mean, you really have to plan out how you're going to work with the kids because you have this thing called pumpkining, which is actually quite sweet. I don't know where that term came from.
I'm assuming it because, you know, the carriage is turning into a pumpkin. Yes.
Yeah. But it's like a legit term that adults use in an industry of like the kids pumpkining. So it's funny to see like a 40-year-old man in cargo shorts being like, the kids are pumpkining. But yeah, that was a new thing.
It's the treatment. We're using adjectives that Roger might use from American Dad with my guest Nahnatchka Khan. Her new series is creator and executive producer is Fresh Off the Boat. I guess I wondered too because obviously you have a real life person who's written this memoir that's incredibly personal and quite ribald in any number of ways, and getting him to trust the kinds of things, and he's written about this in the New York Magazine piece not too long ago, of the kinds of compromise that happen. Is that a tough thing to do, this to navigate between him and the network, between Eddie and the network?
Well, I mean, Melvin Marr, who's one of the exec producers with me, was the one that found the book, brought it to 20th, brought it to me.
20th Century Fox.
20th Century Fox, which
Yeah.
is where, I have a deal at.
You're home
the show.
through American Dad.
Exactly. And Melvin and his partner, Jake Kasdan, have their deal there. So Melvin was the one who sort of put us all together. And I think from the get-go, Eddie's memoir is his entire life up until the time it was published. I think he was like 30. And the part that we're focusing on is a very small section of his life when his family moves to Orlando so his dad can open a steakhouse, and him trying to fit in with these kids set in the mid-'90s. So I knew that, that's the section we wanted to work on. That's, wanted to set the show in. That's what I pitched to the studio and to the network.
So you basically had access to all the book, but you chose to focus on that.
Yeah, to me, that's a funny setting for a series. If you want to do a family comedy set in the mid-'90s with this Taiwanese American family moving from Washington, D.C., Chinatown, where they have all their family and friends, to the white suburbs of Orlando, where they know nobody. That is an interesting setting for comedy, I feel like. And that's what I wanted to do with the show, and everybody was really supportive of it. And so it was never really a question of making, adjustments to tone or anything like that. It was always like, this is what the TV show is going to be. And, how do we make this the best world that we possibly can, and how do we populate this with interesting characters and, again, fictionalized version of starting from real characters and, Eddie's family, but then building them up, creating stuff that didn't happen to Eddie's family, or Eddie. And that was really sort of what the focus was on, of like building out the most interesting version of that world.
But one of the things, though, that I guess I like what you do, and it sort of lends itself to everybody in that household, with the exception of the dad, is they all kind of have this kind of untoward confidence. Because that's not something I really remember from the book at all, that idea that everybody in the household is kind of brimming with confidence. And I wonder where that came from for you.
I mean, I think because in the show, the central character of Eddie is struggling so much to sort of find his place, not only in the world, but also within his own family. So it's sort of like a double fish out of water. The Wongs are moving to this new place that they don't know anybody, but also within that family, there's a black sheep. So there's so much struggle that Eddie's going through sort of internally. His mom doesn't understand the clothes he wears and the music he listens to. And that is very true of sort of first generation, in my experience, families where...
Was that your experience too?
Yeah, definitely, where like your parents don't really understand the music you listen to or the things that you want. It just seems like kind of frivolous and silly. But to you, it's so important, when you're 10 years old or 11 years old or 12 years old. You need whatever it is, like in the episode with Fresh Off the Boat, the Air Jordans that everybody's wearing. And his mom's like, no, like that's crazy. We're not going to get you. Your sneakers are fine. And that sort of, your sneakers are fine, your jeans are fine, your shirt is fine, is like a refrain that I feel like a lot of parents, certainly, immigrant parents, like my parents have used in the past.
But what's interesting about this, too, is that makes it so era-specific, because nowadays kids who come from different cultures learn or are taught to sort of prize those things that make them different.
Yeah.
And 20 years ago, and there's even like a great joke in the pilot where Eddie's saying, well, the black kid doesn't have Jordans. I go, he doesn't. He's black.
Yeah, that's like built-in Jordans.
So that kind of casual racism,
yes,
which seems like almost like a tough line to get past. People, there must have been a little bit of a wrestling match over that one, was there not?
Well, I mean, I think people really appreciated the commentary of that because it sort of provided, another look at what's going on here, which on its surface could just be one kid can't afford the sneakers that these other kids can. But then you sort of take a step back, you ask another question of like, what is it about these sneakers that these kids love? Like, what is the culture that these kids are trying to represent or that these kids find to be like the cool thing? And when you peel back the layers, I think there's a lot of interesting questions that come. So that's why we wanted to keep that commentary. And I think people sort of got it on that level where the kid in the school is not cool, but the culture he represents is the coolest. And they have to give him props for that. So
There's so much said in that scene that it must have taken a while just to construct that, because there's a lot going on. And that thing we were talking about earlier, with the speed of which animation has to work. But there's a bunch of things going on, but there are real faces involved in that sound.
Right, exactly. And, I think it's easy you can just watch the scene as it plays out on its sort of take it for face value. Or if you sort of take a step back and, that episode in particular, and you sort of look at what cultures are being represented and, why people emulate certain types of music, certain types of, shoes, clothes, where that all comes from. And it's being played out in the suburbs of Orlando by these, 12-year-old boys who don't know any of that really, or not thinking about that.
It's all representation for them.
Yeah.
With no subtext.
Exactly. They just want this because probably that's what the other kids want, and that's sort of how that pack mentality works. We played with that scene specifically, maybe taking out the kid Walter, who's like, this school's ridiculous. But it just felt like we were missing that second layer. And if people sort of catch that and think about that, I think it's an interesting idea.
Because I have to say, when watching it, I went and played the scene back a couple of times. I just was struck by how much there was going on in that. It's a pretty complex sort of social commentary. There's real sort of like fast comedy in-your-face stuff that's playing right away. But there are a few levels that scene is working on. That happens a lot in the show. And I've got to think that must be what attracted you to the idea of focusing on the childhood, because there's so much you could do in subtle ways that if you were to do it a few more years later, you have to be a lot more obvious and declamatory about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's an innocence to that time, also specifically the mid-'90s, where there was some discussion when we were developing it early on, like, should we just set it in the present day? And,
Oh, really?
Yeah, because, what's the point? Like, you have to make a case for why do it 20 years ago? And for me, that was the sort of last time before the internet exploded. And you didn't have that outlet. You couldn't go online and find other kids who liked the things you liked, and there was no way to feel less alone. You had to sort of make it work. You had to be friends with the kids at school, be friends with the kids in your neighborhood, and I liked that sort of, again, another sense of isolation for Eddie and for the family. That episode also specifically, it's like Jessica starts to befriend like another outcast. There's another outcast in the neighborhood for other reasons. And they gravitate towards each other. It's that sort of similar thing. And there's a lot of layers of that storytelling as well that I think, And
it's horror that brings them together. Now we have that sort of that suburban horror that Stephen King writes about.
Which is like the scariest place is suburbia. And if you want to think about it on all the different levels, not that you need to, obviously, but that's one of the great things about Stephen King, that he writes terrifying stories about places that you recognize.
And places that are presumably safe.
Exactly.
I'm so sorry out of time. You have to come back. This has been really great.
I would love to. Thank you so much. It's such a good time.
You say that now. My guest is Nahnatchka Khan. She's the creator and executive producer of the new series Fresh Off the Boat on ABC. The show is recorded and mixed by Melissa Morton. It's edited and produced by Jenny Radelet. I'm going to go blast some ODB. I'm Elvis Mitchell. It's The Treatment. To catch up on past episodes of The Treatment, go to KCRW.com or listen on your smartphone with KCRW's mobile apps, or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts. The Treatment is produced and distributed by KCRW Santa Monica.